You don't belong here. Show me your hands or I'll put you on the ground myself." That was the command, barked by a white cop in an airport lounge to a calm black woman, simply sipping her coffee. Seconds later, she was punched, handcuffed, and shoved to the floor, all because she fit a description. What the officer didn't know, she was a sitting federal judge. In a country that claims liberty and justice for all, why do badges still silence truth when the skin is dark? This isn't just a mistake, it's a mirror reflecting a system cracked by bias. As James Baldwin said, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. If that quote hits you as hard as this story will, then stay till the end. Subscribe, leave your thoughts below, and join a community that refuses to look away. Because silence isn't neutral, it's complicity. Under the blinding lights of Atlanta International Airport, everything appeared normal. Except for the woman sitting quietly in the federal officer's lounge. Camille Langston didn't look like someone most people would notice. That was the point. In her pressed navy blue slacks and fitted gray blazer, she blended in with the rhythm of government travel. Fast, efficient, unassuming. Her hair was tied back neatly, her heels modest, and her posture straight. She was early, as always, for her flight to Washington, D.C., where she would testify as both a federal judge and a legal advisor to the FBI in an internal corruption hearing. Camille liked the quiet before travel. It gave her space to think, to reflect on what needed to be done and who might try to stop her from doing it. She took a sip from her paper coffee cup, the bitter roast grounding her as she reviewed case notes on her tablet. She had no idea that her presence was already attracting attention. 3 gates over, Lieutenant Travis Maddox was finishing his shift. A career airport security officer with jurisdiction over law enforcement coordination, Maddox was known for being tough on suspicious travelers, and especially harsh with black and brown passengers. He'd been flagged more than once for excessive force and profiling, but internal investigations always ended with the same outcome: insufficient evidence, no further action. As Maddox approached the secured lounge, his eyes locked onto Camille. She was seated in the VIP section, normally reserved for law enforcement, military or diplomatic personnel. But Maddox didn't see a federal judge or an FBI consultant. He didn't see authority. He saw a black woman sitting alone in a restricted area, without a visible badge, wearing plain clothes and, most unforgivable to him, looking entirely at ease. He squared his shoulders and marched toward her. "Ma'am," he barked, not stopping until he stood directly in front of her table. "This area's restricted. I'm going to need to see your credentials." Camille looked up calmly, noting the nameplate and badge clipped to his chest. Travis Maddox. She didn't stand, didn't flinch. She simply locked eyes with him and said, "I'm authorized. Waiting for my transport clearance." "I didn't ask what you're waiting for," Maddox snapped. "ID. Now." Camille reached for her briefcase, cool and measured. "Sir, unless there's probable cause." "You don't get to play the legal game with me," Maddox cut her off. "This ain't a debate. You're in a federal zone without visible identification. That's a violation." She closed the briefcase slowly. "Actually, it's not. I'm in compliance under Title 49, CFR Part 4, U109. But if you'd like to escalate this, I'm happy to call my agency." "Which agency?" he sneered. Camille hesitated. Not out of fear, but out of calculation. She had seen this before. The kind of officer who didn't de-escalate. The kind who saw black skin as a threat, no matter how calm the tone or lawful the presence. "FBI," she said. Maddox laughed. "Right, and I'm the damn Secretary of Defense." She began to reach into her blazer. Slow, deliberate. "Stop," Maddox shouted, drawing the attention of a few nearby staff. His hand flew to his holster. "Hands up where I can see them." Camille froze mid-movement, her fingers a few inches from her ID. Her voice remained steady. "I'm reaching for my badge. You asked for ID. Remember." "Step away from the bag," he ordered. She remained seated. "Lieutenant Maddox, I am a federal judge and an attorney with the FBI. If you detain me without cause, you are violating multiple federal laws." His face turned red. "You think throwing titles at me changes anything? You people think you can do whatever the hell you want in this country." Those two words, "you people," Camille exhaled slowly. "I'm going to stand up now." "Don't you move," he roared, stepping closer. Before she could rise, his fist flew. It came without warning, no shove, no command, no build-up, just a closed hand, crashing across her jaw. The impact cracked like a whip, sending her toppling sideways into the chair beside her. Her coffee spilled across the table, the tablet clattered to the floor, her breath caught in her throat, as pain bloomed sharp across her face. A woman gasped from behind the counter. A gate agent took a step forward and then froze, paralyzed by the sight of the gun now drawn and pointed directly at Camille, as she lay half-sitting, half-slumped, trying to catch her breath. "Lie on the ground," Maddox shouted. Now, Camille didn't move. Her voice, when it came, was raspy but steady. "You just assaulted a federal judge." "Shut your mouth," Maddox barked. He stepped forward, reached down, grabbed her wrist roughly, and twisted it behind her back. "That's enough." A calm voice cut through the chaos like a razor. Maddox turned, startled. Two men, in tailored black suits, stood behind him. One was holding a badge. The other had already reached for his cuffs. "Lieutenant Maddox, you are hereby relieved of your weapon. Step away from the woman immediately." "What? Who the hell are you?" The taller man stepped forward. "Internal Affairs. Washington Field Office. We've been monitoring your jurisdiction for months. This just confirmed everything." Maddox froze, blinking. Camille was now sitting upright, one hand still gripping her aching jaw. She pulled a small black badge case from her inner pocket and flipped it open. "Federal Judge Camille Langston," she said. "Department of Justice, FBI Legal Counsel." Maddox's face turned gray. "I didn't know." "That's the problem," Camille cut in. "You didn't care to." The second agent stepped behind Maddox, removing the firearm from his holster with surgical ease. "You're being detained pending federal inquiry," the agent said coolly. "Failure to comply will result in additional charges." Maddox's knees buckled slightly as the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. Tight, final, cold. Passengers in nearby gates didn't cheer. No one applauded, but everyone stared. And Camille, bruised but unbowed, rose slowly to her feet. She didn't look at Maddox again. She didn't need to, because in that moment, for the first time in his life, he finally understood what it felt like to be powerless in the hands of someone who thought they could do whatever they wanted. And Camille? She had work to do. This wasn't the end. It was the opening statement. The air in the airport holding room was stale and dry, humming with fluorescent lights and the low, persistent whir of a wall-mounted air conditioner. Camille sat across the table from Lieutenant Travis Maddox, her hands folded neatly in front of her. She didn't ask for an ice pack, though the swelling on her cheekbone had started to deepen into a purplish bloom. She didn't lean back or fidget or try to make the moment more comfortable. She wanted it to be uncomfortable. Maddox shifted in his chair, cuffs still tight around his wrists, his posture rigid with confusion and bruised ego. Two agents stood silently behind Camille, flanking her like shadows. One was Agent Ruiz, her longtime colleague from the Bureau. The other, Agent Fenno, had been assigned to airport misconduct oversight, and until today had only seen Maddox on paper. "You don't need to be here for this," Ruiz had told her before they walked into the room. "I know," Camille had replied, "but I want him to hear it from me." Now, with the walls a sterile beige and the only sound the tick of the analog clock above the door, Camille began. "You assaulted a federal judge," she said plainly, "with no cause, no warrant, no justification." Maddox's jaw flexed, but he said nothing. "You pointed a gun at me. You punched me in the face. You dragged me to the ground, in front of witnesses. Then you tried to arrest me for sitting in a space I was authorized to be in. All of this, because you made a snap judgment about who I was based on what I look like." He squirmed. You didn't have your badge out. I didn't need to, she replied coldly. That lounge allows federal personnel with clearance. I showed no aggression. I answered your questions. I offered to show ID. You escalated because you saw me as less than, because your bias told you I couldn't possibly belong there. Maddox opened his mouth to object, but Ruiz stepped forward and placed a thick folder on the table. It landed with a flat thud that echoed off the walls. Internal Affairs complaints, Ruiz said. 5 in the last 7 years, all for racial profiling or excessive force. All dismissed for lack of evidence. He pulled out a few photos, the grainy security stills, others high-res screenshots from surveillance. But we've been building a case for months. You just made it airtight. I didn't know she was a judge, Maddox muttered. You think I would have? That's the point, Camille snapped, her voice sharp now. You didn't treat me like a threat, because I'm a judge. You treated me like a threat, because I'm black. Silence followed. Thick, heavy, shameful. You abused your authority, you used your badge like a weapon, and now the consequences are finally here. Maddox's eyes darted toward the mirror on the wall. He knew it was two-way. He knew others were watching. His mouth worked for a moment, trying to find something to say, an excuse, a rationalization, but nothing came out. His entire playbook, intimidation, escalation, control had failed, and for the first time he was facing someone he couldn't shake or scare. You're suspended indefinitely, Ruiz said, pending criminal indictment. For assault on a federal officer, Agent Fano added, and deprivation of civil rights under color of law. Camille stood. Her voice was calm again, but iron hard. You won't get to hide behind procedure this time, Lieutenant. You won't be protected by silence or paper pushing. You made your choice. Now you live with it. As she turned toward the door, Maddox's voice cracked behind her. Wait. She paused without looking back. You ever screw up? He asked, quieter now, desperate. You ever make a mistake under pressure? Camille slowly turned her head and locked eyes with him. Yes, she said, but never one rooted in hate. She left the room without another word. 3 days later, the formal charges were announced in a press conference at the U.S. Attorney's Office. The room was packed, reporters shoulder to shoulder, cameras flashing, microphones extended like weapons. Camille didn't speak. She stood behind the podium as the attorney listed the counts: felony assault, unlawful detention, use of excessive force, and civil rights violations. Each one landed like a gavel strike. Across the city, the story spread. Not because it was unusual, because it wasn't, but because this time, someone fought back. Someone with power. And she didn't use it to settle scores. She used it to open doors others had been locked out of for years. The backlash came quickly. Editorials appeared, claiming she had overreacted, that Maddox had been confused, that tensions were high at the airport. Others pointed to her calmness as suspicious. Some even implied she baited the situation. Camille ignored it all. Instead, she met with the Bureau's Office of Professional Responsibility, handed over every detail of her statement, and asked for a full investigation, not just into Maddox, but into the leadership that allowed him to stay on duty after multiple complaints. She requested, in writing, that airport security training undergo federal review. She filed a civil suit, not for money, but for reform, requiring implicit bias training, independent complaint oversight, and mandatory body cams for all airport law enforcement officers. And then she returned to work. But things had changed. When she entered the courthouse the next Monday, people stood a little straighter. Deputies at the door didn't just nod. They watched her, unsure whether to salute or look away. Her staff didn't ask questions. They just followed her lead. Later that week, Maddox was arraigned. He arrived in a gray suit that looked like it had been pressed overnight. His eyes sunken, jaw clenched. The courtroom was hushed. Judge Dennison, a no-nonsense federal magistrate, read the charges aloud. Maddox pleaded not guilty. The prosecutor laid out the evidence with quiet precision. Security footage, witness testimony, physical injury reports, a list of past complaints ignored. And then the courtroom fell silent as Camille took the stand. She didn't deliver a speech. She didn't cry. She didn't even raise her voice. She recounted the moment, the words he used, the tone, the violence. She described how it felt to be punched in the face by someone paid to protect people like her. How it felt to be reminded viscerally that not even a federal robe could shield her from racism in uniform. "How did you respond?" the prosecutor asked. "I enforced the law," she said simply, "the same way I've done for 15 years. The jury watched her with silent awe. The defense had nothing. No apology, no rebuttal strong enough to override what the evidence showed. The trial lasted 5 days. The deliberation lasted just 3 hours. Guilty. Maddox didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just stared at the floor as the bailiff placed cuffs around his wrists once again, this time not in the shadows of a holding room, but in open court. Outside, the media buzzed. Reporters shouted questions. Camille didn't answer. She walked down the courthouse steps alone, her heels tapping against the granite, her eyes fixed forward. Behind her, the system had finally cracked. And in front of her, the path had cleared. Not just for herself, for every person who'd ever been told they didn't belong in a space they'd earned. For every teenager roughed up on a sidewalk, every woman questioned at a checkpoint, every voice silenced by a badge used like a weapon. Falling action, they call it, the part after the climax, when things settle. But for Camille Langston, nothing was falling. Everything was rising. The sentencing hearing took place on a gray morning, the sky low and heavy, as if the weather itself bore witness to the weight of justice being handed down. The federal courtroom was quiet but packed. Law clerks, legal reporters, local law enforcement and community leaders all filled the gallery. They weren't just there for the outcome. They were there because they had heard the story and they wanted to see it through to the end. Camille sat in the front row, not as a judge this time, but as a victim. Her face had healed, though the scar beneath her left eye was faintly visible under a dusting of makeup. It was a scar she no longer tried to hide. It reminded her of what had been taken and what had been reclaimed. The judge read the sentencing verdict with unwavering clarity: 5 years in federal prison, without the possibility of early release, a permanent revocation of Maddox's law enforcement certification, and a formal acknowledgement of guilt, aired into the public record. Maddox stood expressionless at the defense table, his hands clenched in front of him, wearing the same suit he'd worn on the first day of the trial. He didn't speak. He didn't apologize. He just stared straight ahead, hollow-eyed and shrinking beneath the full weight of what he had done. Camille didn't flinch. She didn't need his remorse. The justice system had spoken, and for once it had spoken clearly. Outside the courthouse, cameras swarmed, but Camille didn't give a statement. Instead, she released a single-page letter to the press. "Accountability is the beginning, not the end of justice. I did not pursue this case to punish one man, but to challenge a system that allows power to be abused without consequence. May this verdict serve as a warning to those who believe their badge makes them untouchable, and may it offer strength to those who are told their voice doesn't matter. It does. I am proof." Within weeks, Camille's civil suit reached a historic settlement. The airport authority agreed to a full overhaul of its law enforcement training and oversight procedures. All airport security officers would now undergo annual bias and de-escalation training. An independent civilian review board was created to investigate complaints, with subpoena power and reporting access to federal oversight bodies. The money from the settlement wasn't spent on personal comfort. Camille used it to establish the Langston Justice Initiative, a nonprofit focused on legal advocacy and civil rights training for underrepresented communities, especially Black youth, who aspired to law careers but didn't have access to mentorship or opportunity. Across the country, news outlets picked up the story, but more importantly, law schools and police academies started using the case as a teaching tool, a real-world example of how quickly power can be corrupted and how necessary resistance is, even when it comes at a cost. Camille returned to the bench 2 months later. She walked into her courtroom to a silent standing ovation, not from the public, but from her own clerks and staff. They didn't say anything. They just stood, straight-backed, eyes forward, a quiet acknowledgement of everything she had endured and everything she had refused to let go. She resumed her docket like she always had. No theatrics, no speeches, just law, just integrity, just the quiet, powerful presence of a woman who had stared down a broken system and made it blink. In the years that followed, the Langston Justice Initiative grew nationwide, partnering with civil liberties organizations and producing some of the most promising new voices in American legal reform. Camille rarely spoke about that day at the airport anymore, but when she did, it wasn't to talk about the violence. It was to talk about what came after. Change didn't come fast. It didn't come clean, but it came, and Camille Langston helped carve the path. Not with rage, not with revenge, but with resolve. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, and this story proves it. What happened to Camille Langston wasn't just a single act of cruelty, it was a reflection of how deeply bias can hide behind badges and uniforms. But her strength reminds us that silence protects no one. Whether you wear a robe, a uniform, or just your own truth, you have the power to stand up and push back. Justice doesn't arrive like lightning. It builds like a storm from voices that refuse to be ignored. If this story moved you, if it made you think twice or feel something strong, drop a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and hit subscribe. Not because it helps the channel, but because we're building something here together, a space where truth echoes louder than hate, and your voice, it's part of that echo.